What is going on, Fantasy Football Nation? It is the Week 8 preview edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Reports for your team, your league, your game. This is your home. You know where to go for fantasy football advice every week. Chris Pearson here with you as always. It is Halloween week, as you can tell by the ridiculous getup. I'm going as, of course, kind of I always kind of get a costume that ties in my team name. So this year I'm kind of going with my team name being Bumble Rush Inc. I'm kind of going with the whole kind of bug bee aspect again. I've had insect names the past couple of years. I was a spider last year for the night crawlers, so I'm kind of going with that again this year. I'm wearing my Lightning jersey with Thunderbug on the back of it, so kind of going in the whole Thunderbug aspect of it. So, so I love this time of year. We're getting to the holiday season, and we're also kind of getting down into the mid stretch of the fantasy football season as well. This is in week 8 now. Still have the bye weeks to deal with, at least for a couple more weeks. But again, like I mentioned last week in the week 7 preview, you kind of have a sense of at this point what your team's going to look like, who your reliable players are going to be, getting depth for the bye weeks, and then shipping those guys out. So again, you kind of get the sense of who you have and who you don't have for this week. So another big week ahead. 4 teams again on bye this week. We have another game in London this week in the early morning hours that could display some good fantasy relevance as well. Got to talk about the Thursday night game last night, also between New England and Miami. A lot to get to, so let's just go ahead and dive right in to try to get you a win in Week 8. As for my team last week, just to start off as well, another big win for me last week. I finally got off the schneid, if you will, a 3-game losing streak, but I did pull out the win, 116-90. My team is really starting to look good at this point now that I've gotten some players that are sticking, making good, talented moves. Some teams that have dropped players that I've picked up have benefited. Guys like Danny Woodhead, like Mike Evans, TJ Yeldon. So, hey, if an owner gives up on a player and you think he's going to be a great candidate for the rest of the season, take a shot on him and grab him, especially if you know he's going to pay, and especially if he has a good schedule going forward. Kind of like a Jonathan Stewart of Carolina, who an owner dropped in my league. I picked him up. His schedule is amazing the rest of the season, by the way. He doesn't even play like a defense outside of Atlanta. It has like the rest is like 19th or below in rushing yards. So Jonathan Stewart is potentially out there on your wire. Go get him. So my team looking really solid right now, and hopefully I can make a big playoff push and get these wins to pile up as the season goes on, because my schedule doesn't even look too tough going forward for the rest of the team. So, but we'll go ahead and try to get you a win this week in Week 8. Let's first look at the bye weeks and who you're not going to have for your matchups this week. We're talking about Buffalo, Jacksonville, Philadelphia, and Washington. So you're not going to have these guys in your lineups this week. So you're missing guys like Blake Bortles, who has put up really good fantasy numbers in the past few weeks for the Jaguars. I mean, at this point, you can't even think of Bortles as a bye week filler. You've got to look at him as at least a solid low-end QB1, high-end QB2. But you're not going to have him this week because of the bye week. You're not going to have Sam Bradford. Now, really, the Eagles offensively have struggled this year. But Bradford's still at least a solid QB2, but you're not going to have him this week either. And really, the Buffalo quarterback situation really not fantasy relevant right now unless Tyrod Taylor gets healthy. You're not playing E.J. Manuel in the majority of leagues, and you're really not playing Kirk Cousins. You like that? You like that? I had to go there with Kirk Cousins. I'm sorry. That was just too funny. Everyone was downplaying Kirk Cousins, and then he goes off on the media after the game and says, "You like that?" And actually, it's pretty cool. He's actually selling "You Like That" T-shirts to benefit charity. So props to Kirk Cousins for that, because at least he's benefiting off the hype over his "You Like That" comment. So, but yes, we do like that, Kirk Cousins, what we've seen from you recently, and hopefully you do continue to put up decent fantasy production for the rest of the year. Again, for me, solid QB2, but not maybe, or a bye week filler. But this week you're not going to have him because of the bye, so keep that in mind if you are a Kirk Cousins owner. Running backs, a little bit bigger names this week. You're not going to have LaShawn McCoy. I mentioned TJ Yeldon. You're not going to have him this week. DeMarco Murray or Ryan Matthews. And again, really, with running backs in Washington, you're not really going to rely on any of those guys like Alfred Morris or Matt Jones or Chris Thompson. But you're not going to have them this week either. But, the biggest name missing there is McCoy. Ever since he's come back from the hamstring issue, he's being back to the productive back that he was in Buffalo. Yeldon has had a couple good games of late, again with the Jacksonville offense looking better. So you're not going to have him this week. And again, the Eagles. And Matthews, as I mentioned with Ryan Matthews, he has fantasy value considering the fact that he is very much that dual threat running back where he can catch passes out of the backfield and rip off big plays. So you're not going to have them this week. Wide receivers you're not going to have this week. Robert Woods in Buffalo really is the only relevant option in Buffalo right now because, again, Sammy Watkins is dealing with injuries. Percy Harvin, again, we mentioned a lot of uncertainty surrounding Percy Harvin. Is he injured? Is he not? Is he contemplating retirement? Is he not? A lot to debate there with Percy Harvin. So you're not. But Robert Woods right now the only healthy receiver in Buffalo. Again, the Jacksonville offense, the dynamic offense in Jacksonville with Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. You're not going to have either of those guys this week. Jordan Matthews in Philadelphia. Really the only relevant fantasy wide receiver, though he has been struggling this year as well, but he's still the top option there in Philadelphia. So not going to have him this week. And you're not going to have Pierre Garcon or Jamison Crowder, who's come on strong for Washington. And the question, of course, is when will we see Deshaun Jackson back on the field again, dealing with his hamstring issue. So a lot of question marks there. And then tight end, you're not going to have Charles Clay, Julius Thomas, Zach Ertz, or Jordan Reed. And again, Jordan Reed really is the big name of that bunch. It's nice to see him back healthy and on the field for Washington, being that nice weapon for Kirk Cousins to throw to. Julius Thomas did have a couple, again, Jacksonville, a couple nice games. But again, he's banged up again with a new injury. It's not the hand this time. It's I think it's his groin, something different. So you're not going to might not have him for the foreseeable future. And Charles Clay, Charles Clay, I hyped him last week as a nice bye-week fill, and I used him for Tyler Eifert last week. Only 2 fantasy points, 26 yards receiving. Very much a big disappointment. Most of the targets did go to Robert Woods, so that was kind of a big disappointment as well. But so again, that's why he's more of a tight end 2 going forward than a tight end 1, because you just don't know when he's going to get targets, especially if Tyrod Taylor isn't healthy at quarterback. The DJ Manuel does not prefer Charles Clay. We don't really know there. So kind of a disappointment there. So let's talk about the Thursday night game. Or was it really a game? Because really it was just another dominant exhibition put forth by the New England Patriots. Just absolute sheer dominance again. What more can you say? It was clear, the worry coming in was this Miami Dolphins team legit now? Were they, coming off the last 2 games under Dan Campbell, was this the new Miami Dolphins we were going to see going forward for the rest of the year? But when you play 2 lackluster defenses in Tennessee and Houston, I mean, you're expected to beat up on those teams. You're expected to thoroughly dominate those teams no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in. Whether it was a 1-3 Miami team, you were expected to beat those teams. But so a lot of people coming in are saying, well, could this be the week that maybe we see the real Dolphins? Is this the week really where this team is legit or not? Well, I think it was proven that New England made that pretty irrelevant, because New England just came in, stomped all over them at home, 36-7, a thorough beatdown. I thought it would be at least somewhat of a closer game than that. I was not expecting New England to thoroughly smoke Miami like that, but boy, did they ever. Now, really, the only Dolphin that really saved his fantasy day was Lamar Miller, because he scored the only touchdown of the game. Ryan Tannehill had a night to forget. He did have 300 yards passing, most of that in garbage time. 8 points in a CBS league, but he had no touchdown passes. He threw 2 interceptions. Not the night you would have expected from Ryan Tannehill. You might, and when I tweeted out, I recommended starting a lot of your offensive skill players because I thought they'd have a good night. But boy, the Patriots DST, they came to play. I have them as a reserve unit because I have the Rams unit first in my league. But I tell you what, I'm set at DST, I think, for the rest of the season, because the Patriots truly came to play. I think they ended up with 21 points in a CBS league, and you start with 24. So that's a huge week for the Patriots DST. If you started them, good on you. Obviously, Tom Brady, a 4-touchdown day, 38 fantasy points. If you started him and Julian Edelman, you're off to a 58-point start already in your league, because Edelman had 20 points by himself. So that was huge. So just any Patriot probably. Now again, the only risk concern, really the only Patriot around, you can probably trust any Patriot on the roster right now. If you look at Brady, Edelman, Danny Amendola, Deion Lewis if he's healthy, LeGarrette Blount, obviously Gronk, the DST, Gostkowski at kicker. The only Patriot you might not be willing to trust right now is Brandon LaFell, considering the drop issues. I think as the season goes on, as he develops again, he missed most of the year, so if he develops, again, that rapport with Brady, he'll probably get better over time. But obviously the drops are something you have to be a little bit concerned about. I can't rate LaFleur right now as more of a risky wide receiver 3 or 4 play. But anyone else on the Patriots roster right now, obviously, outside of their bye week, is worth starting. I mean, maybe they've already had their bye week. I'm not sure. But they're worth starting. So clearly, going forward, you can count on a lot of those guys if you have Patriots on your roster, because it looks like they're going to be pretty well putting up points for the rest of the year. So, big game there. New England clearly going to be a monster. There's already people talking again about 19-0. It would not surprise me in the slightest, even though I'm not a Patriots fan. I'm not fond of them because of the whole cheating things and the fact that I like the Colts and the fact that, all that situation. But if you cannot beat them, you cannot beat them. And clearly, right now, I don't really see a team right now outside of maybe the undefeated teams in the NFL, like Cincinnati or Carolina or Green Bay. Maybe Green Bay would probably be the best test for them right now. I would say. I don't see Carolina being able to keep up. I don't see Cincinnati or Denver. I'd say probably Green Bay is right now the best team probably that can keep up with New England right now because of the weapons that they have and Aaron Rodgers and all that. So and the defense is strong there in Green Bay also. So and Carolina's defense is strong too. But again, the limited weapons they have there in Carolina, that would worry me a bit when it came down to hanging with New England. So, but right now the Patriots clearly all around for in reality purposes and in fantasy purposes, very legit for the teams, very very strong. All right, so let's get into the matchups for the Sunday matchups and, of course, the Monday Nighter. Another game in London this week over at Wembley, at beautiful Wembley Stadium, yes. We're treating the Brits to another great show. Well, the Buffalo-Jacksonville game, hey, that was a thrower there last week, and I didn't expect that at all. I thought that would be kind of a laugher, but it didn't turn out that way. This week we've got Detroit and Kansas City, and I tell you what, that could also end up being into a very, very competitive game because you've got a solid number of weapons on both these teams. I really like, a lot of the Lions players this week. I think, Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson are solid starts this week. Obviously, Megatron is an obvious must-start every single week. He's a solid wide receiver 1 considering he's coming off of his monster game last week. But Stafford, again, a great either low-end QB1 or a high-end QB2 this week. I think he gets some very solid production. Kansas City's defense is a little bit strong, but for the most part, I think the fact this game's not being played at Arrowhead Stadium, I think that benefits the Detroit Lions a little bit here. So, and Detroit has had good experience playing in London before. Do you remember the last time Detroit played in London, they came back with a thrilling win over the Atlanta Falcons. So they've had good experience playing in London, so this could be another big game, especially for those two. So I think those guys are definite strong starting options this week. Golden Tate at wide receiver for me, a risky wide receiver 3, but there was a report that came out this week that said that now with the new offensive coordinator there, with Jim Bob Cooter there as the new offensive coordinator in Detroit, they're hoping to get Golden Tate more involved in the offense, and he really, really wants that to happen. So Golden Tate has been mostly a fantasy disappointment this year. Of course, behind Calvin Johnson, maybe even Eric Ebron at tight end is getting more targets, or even Theo Riddick out of the backfield. But Golden Tate, for now, a risky wide receiver 3 at best, but I think you can still use him if you're hurting at wide receiver, if you're desperate this week, or say you don't have an Allen Robinson or an Allen Hurns, or even a Pierre Garçon. I think that maybe you can plug him in there as a wide receiver 3 and take a risk and see what happens if you're hurting at wide receiver. I mentioned Eric Ebron at tight end, and he also is starting to get more involved in the offense, and that's nice to see because really the Lions have not utilized the tight end much since the days of Brandon Pettigrew or who's the guy that danced Fourier, those Joseph Fourier for those guys. But Ebron's starting to get more involved. But until he finds the end zone more often on a consistent basis, I can't really rate him as more of only a high-end tight end 2 for that reason alone. Running backs, I don't really think you can trust any. Again, I don't think you can really trust any of these guys now. If you're playing any Lions running back right now, it's got to be Theo Riddick because, again, and really only in PPR leagues is a desperate RB3 or a flex because, he is starting to get some targets. But, again, they've still got Abdul in the mix, even though he's not playing very well. Joyke Bell is limited again, but what's his health status going to be? It's kind of a mess right now. So, really, if I trust any Lions running back, it's going to be Theo Riddick, but only as a desperate RB3 or flex play in PPR leagues, or the deepest of fantasy leagues. For the Chiefs, your must-start guy is Travis Kelce at tight end. Obviously, he is he is one of the elite tight ends in the NFL. He's going to be starting him. But actually, I really like Alex Smith at quarterback this week as a QB2 or a bye-week filler for someone like Blake Bortles or Sam Bradford. Look, the matchup is good. The Lions' defense has not been anything special this year. They've given up tons of points in games. And, oh, by the way, he might get Jeremy Maclin back this week. So as long as Maclin clears concussion protocol and comes back, Alex Smith has his big deep threat weapon back. So that's huge for him as well. Smith should find ways to get points. So again, usable QB2 or a bye-week filler option this week if you want to rely on that. If you're hurting at quarterback and want to put in Alex Smith as a plug-in guy, I think you can definitely use him in this matchup. Speaking of Jeremy Maclin, again, as long as he plays, 4 out of 5 star. He's a solid play this week as long as he plays. Usable as a wide receiver 3, but definite wide receiver 2 upside given the matchup. Again, the Lions give up a lot, so I think certainly Jeremy Maclin is a usable guy this week. In terms of the running backs, Tracondrick West finally broke out last week. I didn't think, I think a lot of owners, myself included, dumped Tracondrick West after the first game with only the 1 point, thinking, okay, maybe he's not the answer in Kansas City. Maybe he's not going to be the guy that comes through in the end. But last week he broke out. But and this is another good matchup to take advantage of. So but the question is, which one are you going to get? Is he going to be the guy going forward? Is he going to take advantage of this opportunity? For now, he's going to be more kind of a low-end RB2 or a flex play, but a very strong upside this week considering the matchup. So again, if you held on to Tracondrick West, if you held out hope for him, and you weren't one of those who dropped him, then, maybe you go ahead, you take a shot this week considering the early matchup and the good matchup, and you roll with Tracondrick West as a strong RB2 this week. So really, he's really the only Kansas City back you can trust. I don't trust Knile Davis to get a lot of work. I don't even think the Chiefs remember he's even on the roster anymore. I really don't think that's the case. So just a big risk there. I don't like Knile Davis going forward unless we see some more involvement there in the Chiefs' offense. Tampa Bay at Atlanta. This is one that could get ugly very, very fast. Atlanta tends to play well at home. I do remember last year when they played Tampa Bay, that was before Jameis Winston. They routed him at home 50-something to nothing. It was over quickly. This has the potential to be another rout. But then again, Tampa, as long as Jameis Winston doesn't turn the football over, Tampa's offense actually does show some signs of life. He's got a healthy receiver now in Mike Evans. He's got 2 good running backs there in Doug Martin and Charles Sims. Tampa has talent, but the problem is their defense can't stop anybody. So this is a great week to start your Falcons. You're starting your normal trio of Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman, Julio Jones. You're starting them again, as you always would. This is a plus matchup for all 3 of them. You're starting these guys. I don't trust Leonard Hankerson. The thing with Leonard Hankerson, his status is very unknown. He's still battling with a hamstring issue. He's fallen off of late. Not even for me a wide receiver 3. Very, very risky play. I can't recommend Leonard Hankerson, but the main 3 you are starting for the Atlanta Falcons, and of course you're starting the Falcons DST in standard leagues. And I think they're available on waivers in a lot of leagues. So you could probably, if they're on waivers, you can pick up the Falcons and use them this week as well if you stream defenses. Buck-wise, really the only guy who can really must start is Mike Evans at wide receiver, and I'm starting him this week in my league. Look, he came off a 22-point week. He's really the only healthy receiver the Bucs have right now. Vincent Jackson is banged up with a knee issue. They just lost Lewis Murray for the season with a torn ACL. Austin Seferian-Jenkins' health is in doubt, so it's a very, very risky situation. He's really the only must-start guy. Now, Doug Martin, I do like as a strong RB2 with RB1 upside. Again, the Falcons, they're stronger against the pass than they are the run. It's a bit of of an bust alert though. Atlanta's going to pose a little bit of a challenge to that front line, but they're not as lethal against that as say they are against the pass. So that's the big thing there. But you probably can't afford again to sit Doug Martin, RB2 for me. Charles Sims, had a poor showing last week, only had 3 fantasy points in standard league. I got rid of him. Only really worth using as a desperate RB3 or flex. Again, his usage is very limited by game flow, so I don't like that with Charles Sims. Jameis Winston is 3-star for me this week. I really can't even recommend him as a QB2. Again, the turnovers are a concern. Tough Falcons defense. He only has the one healthy wideout. He may get Safarian Jenkins back for this game, but what's his, was he going to be on a snap count? What's his production going to be outside of that? Very, very limited. So very risky there in that regard. So very, very risky QB3 for me. Not thrilled with Jameis Winston. And again, I mentioned Vincent Jackson. His status is in doubt anyway with the knee injury. Very, very questionable there. Even if he plays, a very, very risky wide receiver 3 at best for me. Arizona at Cleveland. The big revolving door surrounding this game in terms of the Cleveland Browns. Johnny Manziel. Supposedly he's going to play because Josh McCown is battling a shoulder issue that he suffered inexplicably running into the wall in St. Louis. I mean, literally, that's Cleveland in a nutshell, okay? That is the Cleveland Browns. That's them in a nutshell. That is Josh McCown running to the sidelines and going to the sideline and then not even stopping his momentum enough and runs into a wall and injures his shoulder. That's the Cleveland Browns, okay? That is them in a nutshell. So he probably won't play. Johnny Manziel is probably going to start, and he's not going to be disciplined by the NFL in the personal conduct policy for the supposed incident with his girlfriend where they're supposedly drinking. Then they found out maybe they weren't drinking. They were just having a big argument. So it was a big old mess. So Johnny Manziel, you're playing the Cardinals defense here. You cannot even take a chance with playing Johnny Manziel against the Cardinals defense. I understand the Browns are at home, but come on now. You would not be that stupid. Avoid, avoid, avoid. Don't do it. I can't recommend it. So don't even try. Really, the only player that I can really recommend to play is Gary Barnidge. I mean, he has been a breakout tight end for the Browns. He loses a bit of luster with Manziel at quarterback instead of Josh McCown. More of a low-end tight end one, but still, you probably can't afford to sit Gary Barnidge considering this recent production that he's had. So you got to play Gary Barnidge. I think you can still use him. Now, if there's any upside for Travis Benjamin, who obviously is a top wideout in Cleveland, he did actually play better with Johnny Manziel at quarterback, I think, than he did with Josh McCown. Because Travis Benjamin, the last time that he and Johnny Manziel were together, do remember, Travis Benjamin caught 2 long touchdown passes from Johnny Manziel. But the problem with that is that means that Patrick Peterson is probably going to be shadowing him all day long. So again, that's the risk you take in trying to throw a dart on Travis Benjamin. So for me, normally Travis Benjamin is a wide receiver 3, but for this week, more about kind of a what-the-heck wide receiver 4. Very, very deep leagues. If you're really wanting to take the risk, I wouldn't. I can't recommend Travis Benjamin as a play this week because of that tough matchup. So really, I can't recommend any Browns outside of Gary Barnidge this week as really starting options for you. And you're not playing any Browns running back. I mean, seriously, you can't at this point. Unless in the deepest of PPR leagues, you can maybe get away with playing Duke Johnson as a flex. But other than that, you're not playing a Browns running back. Now, for the Cardinals, you're starting the majority of your Cardinals. I mean, you are starting the majority of these guys, considering the great matchup, considering how productive the offense has been. So you don't have to tell. I don't have to tell you twice. You're starting Carson Palmer. You're starting the resurgent Chris Johnson, who has found new life in Arizona and is being a beast, literally, at running back. Solid RB2, serious RB1 upside. You're starting him. He is now the new Arizona Lion King. I mean, literally, he's taken over that, Chris Johnson, found new life in Arizona. He's kind of that new emergence. He's the new one. He's the new anointed running back in Arizona. I just had to do that. But he's found new life. And you really need to trust him. So you start him, you start Carson Palmer, you start Larry Fitzgerald, you start John Brown if he's healthy. The hamstring is still becoming a nagging issue for him, but as long as he goes, you start him as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. Obviously, Fitzgerald is a wide receiver 1. You start those guys. And maybe even you take a shot on Michael Floyd, because Michael Floyd has started to look good again with him back from the finger injury. You start him again. More of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3, because considering he is losing targets to those top 2 guys, but you utilize him. You use him, you plug him in there, and see what happens. Now, really, again, because Chris Johnson is now the new guy in Arizona, you really cannot play either Andre Ellington or David Johnson unless you play them as really desperate RB4 or flex guys. They're not getting the touches anymore. They're not getting the workload of work. They're only be in there on like third down and passing plays. So you really can't not enough fantasy value at this point to be relevant. You really can't trust playing those guys. But most of your Cardinals you will start this week. I'm like, I am shedding hair. This thing is very, very sheddy. San Francisco at St. Louis. 1 o'clock start. Really like a lot of the Rams this week. Obviously, the must start for the Rams is two things. Todd Gurley, obviously, and my opponent. I mean, I don't know if he watches my show, but is kind of a dope because he is leaving Todd Gurley on his bench. Say what? I mean, really? I don't. Thanks to you for being an idiot, but Todd Gurley is a RB1 going forward. I mean, seriously, who as a fantasy owner leaves Todd Gurley on their bench? I think that's the reason why this guy has lost 5 straight games, because you leave Todd Gurley on your bench? Seriously. And he's putting up buku numbers the last couple weeks. So Gurley is as solid as RB1 as they can get the rest of the season. And he's an obvious must start at this point. So you've got to roll with him. Nick Foles, very, very risky QB3 in deeper leagues. I mean, the matchup's good. San Francisco is exactly a great defense. But Tavon Austin's really the only weapon the Rams have. And that's really the risk you take. Why they sent Chris Givens to Baltimore, I'll never know. But because he was a great playmaker there, I think, in St. Louis. But, risky QB3 in deeper leagues for me. Tavon Austin has been the most consistent. For now, he's more of a risky wide receiver 3 until we see more work, until we see a little more consistency. But some people are saying that Tavon Austin is going to be a breakout wide receiver, and I can potentially see that because, again, he is the best option the Rams have. He is getting a lot of targets. He's getting a lot of work. So I think certainly that could be a very feasible option. But for now, very much still a bit of a risk, but if you're hurting at wide receiver and want to take a flyer on Tavon Austin, I wouldn't blame you for that. So certainly a risk, but you can use him as a wide receiver 3 if you're hurting. The Niners, I really can't recommend anybody this week. Against this Rams defense, I really would not trust any 49er player. Colin Kaepernick, yes, there's value because of his rushing ability, but the Rams are come off a big week against Cleveland. That defense is so strong. The pass rush is strong. They're going to find a way to chase Kaepernick out of the pocket. I can't recommend him more than a desperate QB3 or 4. Very, very risky. Carlos Hyde, tough play. I would not chance it. More of a low-end RB2 or 3. I really can't recommend him. And again, the wide receivers, Torrey Smith, Anquan Bolden, very, very risky, touchdown-dependent wide receiver 3s. I can't really recommend him this week either. None of the Niners are must-start guys. Let's just put it that way. Giants at New Orleans, a 1 o'clock game. This also could produce a lot of fantasy point relevance. This game really could put up some big fantasy numbers. Obviously, you've got to like a lot of the Saints this week. The Saints offense looks so strong these past few weeks. So you've got to keep starting Drew Brees. You've got to keep going with Mark Ingram, especially a week after the Giants just got absolutely gashed by Darren McFadden, for gosh sakes, of the Cowboys. Ingram's definitely usable as an RB2 with upside. You can definitely roll with him this week as well. The wide receivers, I still like Willie Snead. I still think he's the top option. Very much usable as a wide receiver 2 or 3 till further notice. Same with Brandon Cooks. I think those 2 receivers are really your only trustworthy Saints receivers that you can play in leagues. I'm still not really sold on Brandon Coleman yet. He's just not getting enough targets for me to be fantasy relevant. Now, Ben Watson at tight end I think is usable this week. Say you don't have a Zach Ertz or a Julius Thomas or even Jordan Reed. I think you can put in Ben Watson as somebody that, as a bye-week filler or a tight end 2 to cover you for now. Or even a Charles Clay, I think you can put in for him as a bye-week filler too. So Ben Watson getting more work involved in the offense. I think he's usable as a bye-week filler this week as well. So I like a lot of the Saints players this week. The only Giants I really like this week, obviously, are Eli Manning. Worth a look as a QB2 with some upside because, again, the Saints secondary, not exactly all that impressive. So, you can't really fault Eli for really making do with what he has. Odell Beckham's dealing with hamstring issues. Victor Cruz has still been out. He's got Ruben Randall, but he hasn't really done much. So he's got Shane Vereen, though, in the backfield. So Eli's making do with what he has, and he's powering through that. So really, you know, it's a great matchup, even though they're on the road. I think he's definitely worth a look, at least as a QB2 with some upside. You can play him. You play Odell Beckham as long as he's healthy, obviously. If the hamstrings are not an issue, I think you play Odell Beckham. He should bounce back. Had kind of an off week last week, but I think you do play Odell Beckham as long as he is healthy. Ruben Randall, for me at wideout, as long as Victor Cruz remains out, he's still usable as a what-the-heck wide receiver 3, but again, very touchdown-dependent, very target-dependent. Doesn't get a whole lot of work there, so just kind of a risk in that regard. Now, Victor Cruz, there are kind of conflicting reports as to whether or not Victor Cruz will be back this week. So really, it's a big, big risk until we get a definitive answer, until if he does play, and if we see him on the field, he's a very risky wide receiver 3 or 4 until we see more of what Victor Cruz can bring to the table. But if he's still out, keep him reserve. But just monitor that situation going forward. Check the practice report today. See what Victor Cruz does in practice today to see what his status is moving forward. So just keep that in mind as well. But for now, still just something to monitor going forward. And running backs, you really can't trust the Giants running back right now. Outside of Shane Vereen in PPR leagues getting those targets for the receptions, you really can't trust a Giants running back. It is now a 4-man committee now in the Giants backfield. Rashad Jennings, Andre Williams, Shane Vereen, and now someone named, and how fitting that he breaks out for this game, Orleans Darkwa. What? Orleans Darkwing? What? I mean, what? Really? Let's get dangerous? What? I mean, really? And Orleans? I mean, this is like, what? You know, who the heck? Exactly. I mean, this is like, I don't even know who this guy is. He comes out of nowhere, gets the majority of carries last week, torments fantasy owners. Apparently, the Giants just hate fantasy football at running back because we don't know who it is. So avoid. If I had my alert horn, I would play it here. Avoid. Don't touch it. I cannot recommend any Giants running back outside of Shane Vereen in PPR leagues. Minnesota at Chicago. You know, this one could get pretty ugly in some respects because, you know, it seems like Minnesota has always had Jay Cutler's number. You know, the Vikings usually play very, very well against him. The Vikings defense is strong. So this is a tough matchup. You know, Cutler has had 21 points in 3 straight weeks, but this is a very, very risky matchup. If you don't have better options at quarterback, you might have to be stuck with Cutler, but more of a low-end QB2 this week for me because the tough matchup. Just very, very risky play for me. I'm benching him this week in favor of Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Jets. So very, very risky for me this week. Matt Forte, you know, again, a bit of a risk, but again, you probably can't afford to sit Matt Forte. To me, more of a low-end RB1 than his elite RB1 status, but still, you'd have to play him. Alshon Jeffrey, though, to me, is still a must-start as long as he's healthy. He's the top Bears receiver they have there. He's clearly back in the fold healthy. You got to play him as long as he's going. Eddie Royal, you know, shot-in-the-dark wide receiver 3 at best. You know, again, now that Jeffrey's back healthy, that takes away Royal's fantasy value, drops it down. But Jeffrey can't get all the targets, so there's got to be someone else to pick up the slack. So Eddie Royal usually is that guy. So, you know, for me, more of a shot-in-the-dark guess. Now, Martellus Bennett at tight end. Now that he's healthy again and Cutler is back, you know, for me, still that low-end tight end 1 status. I think you can use him this week as well as a solid tight end option as well. But Cutler Forte is just a little bit risky given the tough matchup. But if you have no better options, you're probably starting those guys anyway. As for the Vikings, really the only guys that I'm looking to this week is really must-start guys are obviously Adrian Peterson, because he's matchup-proof. You're starting him regardless. And how about Stephon Diggs at wide receiver? My gosh, Minnesota has found a gem in this rookie out of Texas Tech. Had a ridiculous touchdown catch last week against Detroit. Diving, you know, beating 2 men in the secondary and then reaching out, diving for the end zone for the score. If you've not seen it yet, I suggest you find the video on YouTube or NFL.com and check that out because it was absolutely ridiculous and nasty catch in the end zone by Stephon Diggs. He has emerged the top option in Minnesota. He is usable as at least a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 upside for the rest of the season until we see anything different. He is the guy right now in Minnesota at the wide receiver spot. Not Mike Wallace, not Charles Johnson. I can't believe I would say that because I thought Charles Johnson would be the breakout guy, but the injury has messed up his production, and just the fact that usually Minnesota is going a conservative offense with Adrian Peterson, it's really muddled his outlook. Same with Teddy Bridgewater. The potential is here for Bridgewater to have a big game this week. The potential is there. But again, the fact that they're revolving the offense around Peterson, that kind of caps that. But at least, the fact they found Diggs as a weapon, borderline QB 2 or 3, I would say, usable, but only if you have no better options at quarterback. That's just the way I see Teddy Bridgewater right now until we see kind of a changing of situations, in Minnesota. San Diego at Baltimore for a 1 o'clock start as well. You are starting your Chargers in this matchup. Baltimore, their defense is not what it was. The pass defense is toward the bottom of the NFL, which means obviously a big week for guys like Phillip Rivers, for Keenan Allen, for Ladarius Green at tight end, because Antonio Gates might not play this week again. Obviously, he's likely going to miss a couple weeks with a knee issue, so Ladarius Green is certainly usable as a low-end tight end 1 this week. Keenan Allen looked fine to me last week. The hip didn't seem to be bothering him at all. Strong wide receiver 1. And again, Phillip Rivers, a must-start QB1 for me this week, in my opinion. Stevie Johnson at wide receiver, he might find the end zone this week. If you're desperate, you can certainly take a flyer on him as a wide receiver 3. I think certainly he is usable there as well. And Danny Woodhead at running back. Oh my gosh, DW coming off a career week with 21 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns. Again, most of that came in garbage time, but still, you can see how usable he is there. He's going to get a lot of touches. He is one of the safer RB2 plays right now with some upside in both standard and PPR, at least considering Melvin Gordon's in the doghouse, the fumbling issues, not being productive enough. DW is the back to own in San Diego right now and the back to play. And I hope he continues these big weeks because I've got him on my team, and I love seeing those fantasy points coming from Danny Woodhead. As for the Ravens, I think you can use a lot of your Ravens here too, especially now that Steve Smith is back healthy at wide receiver. It's nice for Joe Flacco to have that weapon back. But if the game gets ugly fast, Flacco could put up some garbage time numbers. So for me, Flacco is more of a borderline QB1, high end QB2 for those numbers. He should still put up decent fantasy stats for you. Because, again, he's got Smith as a weapon. He's got Crockett Gilmore at tight end back healthy. So some decent numbers to come out of Joe Flacco's day. Justin Forsett, is definitely usable as a low-end RB1. Hey, he had a score against that tough Cardinals defense last week. So certainly, still a strong option there for you as long as he's healthy. So definitely usable as a low-end RB1. Steve Smith, as long as he's healthy, he is a rock-solid wide receiver 2 for the rest of the year. I mean, literally. The guy, again, I mentioned, does not play like he is 30-some years old, okay? He literally is continuing to play well every single week, and as long as that back or anything else doesn't become an issue, he continues to make things look way too easy. You have him in your lineup as a strong wide receiver, too. And I mentioned Crockett Gilmore. If you're desperate at tight end, he's worth a look. He's worth a look as a tight end 2 play. If you're really, really desperate, so worth the look. Cincinnati at Pittsburgh for a 1 o'clock start. The big news out of this game, obviously, is that the Steelers get Big Ben Roethlisberger back. He is expected to play this week. He says there is no mobility issues in his knee, so he is full go for this week, it looks like. But again, the thing about this is a very tough matchup for Pittsburgh. Even though they're playing it at home, Cincinnati is 6-0. Their defense is strong. For me, Big Ben is certainly usable as a low-end QB1 or high-end QB2, but there's still a bit of a risk considering this tough matchup. But if you've had him on your bench for a while and you don't have better options and you wait to see him come back, this would be a great week to put him back in there. So certainly he is usable. Certainly he's going to be throwing to Antonio Brown, unlike the other quarterbacks on the roster that didn't. Antonio Brown, you need him back in your lineups with Big Ben back. He's going to be the top option again. But you can still use Martavis Bryant as still a boomer bust wide receiver 2 or 3 because, again, he's still getting a lot of targets, still getting a lot of work there in Pittsburgh. So, his potential increase is only with Big Ben at quarterback. So he's usable again. You get him back in there as a strong starting option. Obviously, you start Le'Veon Bell. So those 4 guys, are all usable this week. Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant. Yes, you get all those guys in your lineups this week. As for the Bengals, again, the Steelers secondary is nothing to be impressed about. As long as you still have Andy Dalton, as long as Andy Dalton keeps this rolling streak up, you keep playing Andy Dalton. You keep playing Tyler Eifert at tight end. Had the bye week last week, but now he's back. Get him back in your lineups. He's still one of the most elite options there. You start A.J. Green. I mean, those three are pretty much bona fide starters at this point. Dalton, Green, and Tyler Eifert. As for the running backs, I still like Giovanni Bernard more than I do Jeremy Hill. I have Bernard a little bit higher ranked. Bernard is an RB2 or even a flex play. Jeremy Hill, same thing, but more of an RB3 or a flex play. Either are both decent options, but I like Gio Bernard more because he has been more involved lately in the Bengals offense. So as long as Gio Bernard gets more touches and more work, he's going to be higher ranked than Jeremy Hill in a lot of situations. And how about Marvin Jones at wide receiver? Interesting note here, if you're hurting at wide receiver and Marvin Jones is out there in your league. I tried to get him this week for depth. I missed out on him, but if he's out in your league, interesting to this. Marvin Jones has touchdowns in 3 out of 6 games this season and is being frequently targeted. Even though A.J. Green is there, even though Tyler Eifert's there, he is continually being targeted as well. So Marvin Jones is a guy that is worth a look as a wide receiver 3 going forward. If Marvin Jones is out there in your league, and I don't know why he would be at this point, he's out there in mine, but somebody got him. If he's out there in your league, go get Marvin Jones and take a shot on him as a wide receiver 3. I don't think you'll be disappointed in that. Tennessee at Houston for a 1 o'clock start as well. This could be, this could actually be a pretty interesting matchup because, again, both these defenses really, really bad. As we saw Miami beat up on both of them. So this could be actually a potentially high-scoring game because, again, the defenses can't stop anybody. The big question on both sides. For Tennessee, is Marcus Mariota going to play this week? Is he going to be back this week, battling the knee issue? They're clearly a better offense with Mariota there. Zach Mettenberger was a disaster against Atlanta. Well, actually, the whole Titan offense was a disaster against Atlanta last week, only scoring 7 points. But, if Mariota does go, it's a good matchup for him. He's a solid QB2 with some upside if he plays this week. But if he's out, I can't really recommend Mettenberger as more than a risky QB3 because of what we saw last week against Atlanta. So very, very risky for me in that regard. I would much prefer Mariota leading this offense against Houston than Zach Mettenberger. Other plays for Tennessee, really only other recommended guys. Kendall Wright, if Mariota plays, to me, more of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3. If Mettenberger plays, more of a risky wide receiver 4. Delaney Walker at tight end, if Mariota plays, I think he's at least a low-end tight end 1, tight end 2. If Mettenberger, more of a tight end 2. So, again, it depends on what quarterback you're going to get. And, again, I can't really recommend a Titans running back, at least till David Cobb comes back. I think David Cobb is going to be the best answer for the rest of the season. Some are saying it's going to be Antonio Andrews. I'm not sold on that yet. I think David Cobb is going to be the best back when he gets healthy. So, for me, I can't recommend playing a Titans running back right now. Maybe you stash an Antonio Andrews or David Cobb on your bench in the meanwhile if you have the room. But otherwise, I can't recommend playing a Titans running back at the moment. For the Texans, really the only one, again, you can really recommend for sure as a must-fire start is DeAndre Hopkins, or a surefire thing is DeAndre Hopkins. He's the top wide receiver in the league right now in terms, I think, of yardage, touchdowns, maybe any stat out there you throw. He's clearly the top option. He's a must-start. Brian Hoyer, here's the thing with Brian Hoyer at quarterback. Ryan Mallett's officially off the team. He's released. He's done. They brought in T.J. Yates to be the backup, and he knows the Houston system well. But with Arian Foster also done for the year now with the Achilles injury, look for Brian Hoyer to really maybe have to throw the ball a lot more in games because we don't know which running back out of Alfred Blue, Chris Polk, or Jonathan Grimes is going to take the lead, and none of them on their own can replace Arian Foster's production. So certainly, maybe for now, Brian Hoyer is going to utilize his skills a lot more. So, look for him this week to have a 5th straight week with 20 or more points this week. I think certainly that's a possibility. Solid QB2 this week with definitive QB1 upside. If you're in a pinch at quarterback, I think Brian Hoyer is certainly one you can plug in there and put in your lineup this week as well. And for running back, if you pick one Texan up off waivers for running back for now, it's Alfred Blue. I think he's going to get the first. I think he's going to get the first crack at replacing Arian Foster's production. But, you know, let's see who really emerges out of that group of three first before we even put a stock into a Texan running back at this point. But a huge blow for Arian Foster and his fantasy owners, by the way. You know, fourth quarter of a blowout game, you know, not competitive. Arian Foster just pushing off his route and the Achilles goes. I mean, that's really tough stuff. It was tough to, when I saw the video, it was tough to watch, tough to see. And same for the Dolphins yesterday. Cameron Wake blows out his Achilles. He was like second on the team in sacks this year. So that's a blow for the Dolphins defense as well. So tough blows on Achilles injuries the last couple weeks. I got to do it for this next one. I got to do it for this next one. New York Jets at Oakland. Yes, I said New York Jets at Oakland. Got to do it. It's Ryan Fitzpatrick. Sorry there. Ryan Fitzpatrick of the New York Jets. Our New York Jets. Hey, this is Mob Guy. You know what it is. You know, this is my favorite player, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Hey, guess what this guy has done for the Jets this season, man? He is just putting up amazing numbers. Hey, by the way, I want to thank that one guy, NM Polly, whatever it is, for punching Geno Smith in the jaw. I guess Geno needed a wake-up call or something, man, because, man, Ryan Fitzpatrick has come in here and done some awesome things. I think Geno needed a wake-up call, you know? But anyway, Ryan Fitzpatrick, oh my gosh, this guy has been absolutely amazing. He's had over at least 19 fantasy points in 5 straight weeks. 5 straight weeks, okay? Or maybe 6, I forget the number, but you know what I'm saying. I've been hyped up on stuff. But, you know, you understand what I'm saying. He's just been absolutely insane. And this week, who does he get? Who does my man Ryan Fitzpatrick get this week? He gets the Oakland Raiders. The Raiders, man. I know in the old days it was Al Davis and just win, baby. Well, you're not winning anymore, guys. Now, you're putting up decent numbers. You're putting up good numbers. Don't get me wrong. You've got talent there. You've got young guys. Hey, that's all well and good. That's great. But my man Ryan, your defense couldn't stop a nosebleed on Mount Rushmore, okay? If one of their president's noses was bleeding, you couldn't go up there and stop that either. You might even fall off the frickin' mountain before the blood keeps flowing because you get trapped in it, okay? You slip and fall on that blood, and then you fall down the mountain, all right? You're not stopping it. You're not stopping Ryan Fitzpatrick. You're not stopping Chris Ivory. You're not stopping Brandon Marshall. You're not stopping Eric Decker, okay? You're not stopping the Jets. It's just not going to happen. My boy, Ryan Fitzpatrick, is going to have another big week for fantasy owners. In fact, I heard my boy Chris here. I heard him say that he's starting him in his fantasy league this week. Can you believe that? I never thought I'd see the day that my boy Chris, who pounded on Ryan Fitzpatrick before in previous fantasy football stock report videos, that he would actually start him in a fantasy league. I never thought I'd see the day, but you know what? Mob Guy's got the skills. Mob Guy, and knowing his buddy Ryan Fitzpatrick, he gets some swaying words in there. He gets some intellect in his mind. He has some, a nice way with words and his talking. And I tell you what, I convinced him. Said, look, man, look at these numbers. Look at these stats. Look at the talent he's got there in New York. Look at all of this. And he's playing Oakland, and you know the Raiders defense sucks. You've said it in your videos a number of times. Man, it's a given. It's a given, man. You've got to play Ryan Fitzpatrick. And he's looking at that going, well, and he says, you know what? That might be not a bad idea. And he didn't say it like that, obviously, but that's kind of what he was saying. So I tell you what. Take it from the Mob Guy. Ryan Fitzpatrick is a solid QB1 this week. Yeah, I said it. QB1 this week with serious, even more than that upside. In fact, I'm ballsy enough to say he's going to be a top 10 quarterback play this week. I mean, what more can you say about Ryan Fitzpatrick? And his schedule going forward is pretty awesome, too. Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't play a top 10 defense except for one the rest of the season against the pass. If you need help at the quarterback position, you look no further if he's on your waiver wire than Ryan Fitzpatrick. Mob Guy out. Thank you, mob guy. I knew that when I said the Jets, you would come in, you'd swoop in like you always do, and you would just, yeah, you'd do that. So what he said, yeah, and yes, I am starting Ryan Fitzpatrick. I never thought that would happen, but it is happening, and and I agree. I like his schedule going forward. I like the Jets offense. I like a lot of these guys this week. I like all those guys that he mentioned. I like Ryan Fitzpatrick. I like Chris Ivory. As long as that hamstring's not an issue, I like him as a solid RB1. I like Brandon Marshall, must start wide receiver 1. And Eric Decker, strong wide receiver 2. I like all these guys because, again, the Raiders' defense does suck, and I think all those guys are usable. As for the Raiders, I think really the only guy you can really trust is Amari Cooper. I think really he's the only guy who can play here as a normal wide receiver 1 or 2 like he has been. He's going to be shadowed by a very tough secondary, but you probably can't afford to sit Amari Cooper this week, so I think you can use him as well. Latavius Murray at running back, bit of a risk considering the tough matchup. You can use him as an RB2, but only if you don't have better options out there. Michael Crabtree, he's emerged as a decent wide receiver 3, and actually, Michael Crabtree has gotten more targets this season than Amari Cooper has. Interesting stat there. He's gotten at least 8 targets in every game this year, and he's putting up decent fantasy numbers and had a touchdown in 3 out of the last few weeks, like 3 out of 6, 7 weeks. So he's definitely usable as a solid wide receiver 3. Now, Derek Carr, I can't really recommend Derek Carr as a usable option this week. The Jets defense, as we all know, very, very strong. Not even a recommended bye-week filler option. Very, very risky play for me. I don't think you take a shot on Derek Carr this week. Seattle at Dallas for a 425 start. Really, this is really a one-sided thing. You trust a lot of your Seahawks. You can't trust a lot of your Cowboys. I mean, that's really the big thing with this matchup. With Seattle, you're starting Marshawn Lynch. You're starting Russell Wilson. You're starting Jimmy Graham, I think. I mean, because now he's being targeted again. I think you're definitely at least putting him in as a low-end tight end 1 because he's getting more work and he's being usable in the offense. So I think you definitely can use Jimmy Graham. And at wide receiver, again, really the only one you can really, really trust is Doug Baldwin. But I am worried eventually about Tyler Lockett potentially leapfrogging him in the pecking order a little bit. Because, again, the young, they're starting to really get Tyler Lockett more involved as well in the offense. So, again, bit of a risk. And Jermaine Kearse is still there too, let's not forget. So, very, very risky. But Baldwin right now is still more of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3. Everyone else more of a wide receiver 4. And Paul Richardson might come back soon. So, who knows with his status. So, just a risk right now. But other than that, Seahawks across the board, you can pretty much start. Cowboys, really the only one you can maybe get away with playing as an RB3 or a flex is Darren McFadden. It looks like now he's going to be the top option in Dallas. It looks like they've got that sorted out. Christine Michael looks like is not coming anytime soon. We all fell for that one, unfortunately. Joseph Randle is not only hurt, but he's in a bit of hot water, apparently. He could be suspended for a couple games under the personal conduct policy, so that's a messy situation. So really, Darren McFadden is, RB3 or flex at best, but a risky play given the tough matchup. Matt Castle, you could not pay me enough to start Matt Castle against Seahawks defense. No. That is the don't be stupid presented by Shania Twain moment, okay? Because you don't want to do that. So don't be stupid, don't do that. Jason Witten at tight end, not even worth a look as a tight end 2, really with Castle at the helm. It's just too much of a risk. I don't really like that. And at wide receiver, now there are reports that Dez Bryant may come back this week. There's some conflicting stories out there. It's something you want to monitor this week in practice. But then the question is, if he plays, it sounds like he's going to be on a snap count. So it's a really risky play. For me, if he does go, a very, very risky wide receiver 2 or 3 until we see what he does on the field. And the fact the matchup's tough. Very, very risky for me. He's really the only one, if he plays, you can start at wide receiver. I wouldn't even really trust Terrence Williams right now either, so just keep that in mind. Green Bay at Denver, the big-time primetime game at 8:30, the battle of 2 undefeated teams. This matchup for me, you can probably start a lot of these guys. Aaron Rodgers, though, the Denver defense is very tough, especially on the road. It is a trickier matchup, but you can't sit Aaron Rodgers. He's still a low-end QB1, but I don't think Aaron Rodgers reaches 20 points this week. I'd be surprised if he does this week, considering this tough matchup. Eddie Lacy, I'm not really thrilled with him or James Starks this week. Both are nothing more than RB3s or flex plays. It's kind of a muddy situation there at running back in Green Bay. You probably can't afford to sit either Randall Cobb or James Jones. They're both good at wide receiver. And the big story this week is that Devontae Adams may come back from the ankle injury. But until we see what he brings to the field, he's a very risky wide receiver 3 or 4. What's Ty Montgomery's role going to be in that? So very, very risky across the board. As for the Broncos, the only guys I can really recommend are the wide receivers, Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, they're still getting production, even though Peyton Manning is not. They're putting up big games every single week, so you can still put those guys in strong, at least wide receiver 1 or 2s. But Peyton Manning, a lot of people are dropping him, which I can understand. Very, high-end QB2 status, only usable if you really don't have any better options. The Packers' defense is nothing to sneeze at either, so I take that back. They are pretty strong in some regards, but they're playing at home, which is an added benefit, so just very, very risky. And again, I'm not going to recommend any Denver running back against that tough defense. The running game has been dismal. C.J. Anderson is, again, a major bust. Ronnie Hillman is the one you play if you do play one, but only as a desperate, desperate RB3 or flex play if you're hurting at running back. And finally, the Monday Nighter, Colts at Carolina. I like a lot of these guys in this game. I think you can play a lot of players in this matchup. Even though I think it's going to be easier, I recommend more of the Panther players than I do the Colts players as must-start guys. I think you must start Cam Newton. You must start Greg Olsen, obviously. Those two are going to make plenty of plays this week as well. I think you definitely also, as I mentioned with Jonathan Stewart, must start Jonathan Stewart right now. He's been strong the last few weeks. His schedule is amazing going forward. Rock solid RB2 with RB1 upside. The Colts' run defense, as we know, is abysmal. They're giving up chunks of yardage. Jonathan Stewart should keep it going this week in this great matchup. You start him. And Ted Ginn really is the only Panther wide receiver that you really is fantasy relevant at this point, but that probably means that Vontae Davis is going to be on him most of the night. So I can really only recommend Ginn as a very risky wide receiver 3 play. So that's how I see Ted Ginn this week for the Colts. Andrew Luck is definitely a bust alert this week, though, because, again, the tough matchup going to Carolina in prime time. Very, very risky. But, still usable, kind of more of a low-end QB1 than a must-start. But, again, you might not see the big point production you're expected to normally see from Andrew Luck. T.Y. Hilton, for me, again, not an elite start because of the tough matchup in that secondary, but still a strong wide receiver 2 regardless. Dante Moncrief will continue to be a very touchdown-dependent wide receiver 3, but he might get more looks now because Philip Dorsett is going to be out for a while with that fractured ankle. So that means more looks for Dante Moncrief. So, still possibly usable as a wide receiver 3 if you're hurting at wide receiver. Frank Gore, more of a low-end RB2, again, based on the tough matchup, but still usable in the majority of leagues as well. And, again, I mentioned Colts tight ends. I just put, as always, nope. You're not using any of those guys because they're not consistent enough. All right, guys. That is it for me this week for Week 8. Thank you guys so much, as always, for your support and your watching and your following. It means so much, as always, to me. As always, if you have any lineup dilemmas heading into the Sunday or the Monday game, please hit me up in the comments below, or you can also post on the discussion page, or even tweet me. Tweet me at Fearsonator, and I will... Oh, by the way, I guess I'll put on here for full disclosure. If you don't know how to spell that, and I know some people don't, if you wish to do it this way, and I know some people might, but there we go. At Fearsonator, I know it's backwards, but at PHERSONATOR. That's my Twitter. I always post the link to the video on my Twitter feed. So if you have questions there as well, you can ask away there as well. But yeah, just if you have any questions, hit me up. And good luck this week. Get a win in Week 8. Happy Halloween, everybody. Enjoy your time. Don't eat too much candy now. I don't want to see you thrown up on a nightly news channel. And we will see you all again next week for the Week 9 preview edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game, your home. Thanks, guys, and good luck.